Seti, can I start with Isaac coming? Have you got word on if he's chosen you or the Crows?
Look, I think that he's more likely to not be at Port Adelaide next year. I'm not sure whether there's been any sort of official announcement from his camp right now, but I think it'd be highly unlikely that he's at Port Adelaide next year.
What about his teammate Perryman?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That's still to play out. I'm not necessarily sure that we're at the front of the queue there. It's not to say that we haven't tried with both, but we're happy to put ourselves out there and give it a crack. If we end up at the front of the queue, then great. Harry's a good player, but equally, we get a few of our guys back that we didn't have at the end of last year. We think that we've got a group there who can go into 2025 anyway.
Is that more role for Harry in terms of the sort of position he's looking to play at a club?
I'm not sure. I mean, that ultimately will be a decision and discussion for him.
If you don't get... Sorry, Dan Houston, what I guess is the asking price for you guys, and what do you need to see from other clubs to facilitate a trade there?
Well, I think firstly, with regard to Dan, and the trade period, I don't think we've ever necessarily come out in the media and suggested what we think we're going to need. There are so many different permutations that can happen that for any player who's leaving, I don't want to define, I know the narrative is around 2 first-round picks and that type of thing. I think we just wait during the trade period to see ultimately what we get offered. Dan's made it clear to us that his preference is to be in Victoria. He's also said that if that can't work in a fair manner, that he's happy to stay. So we'll just have to wait and see how that transpires.
Is it best deal, or are you looking at any particular clubs? I know that's probably cramped.
No, well, I mean, we're not. Dan obviously has to give us an indication as to where he might be willing to go, but at the same time, whichever club he may choose has to be able to satisfy us, importantly. So, Dan knows that. We've been really clear to Dan over the last couple of days that's our position.
Was the club ultimately surprised when they got the final decision from Dan on this? Obviously, it's been pretty firm over the last month that he would be here in 2025.
Well, look, I think we all have to take a step back sometimes, and Dan's not the first person to have his feelings oscillate over a period of time. He's not the first person to put out a position that he's staying and then ultimately maybe leaving. People get things wrong or change their views all the time. I'm sure that you would all reflect upon things that you've done over time where you may have had a view 2 weeks after the fact that you said something or did something that may not have ultimately been right. So, we're supporting Dan in terms of wanting to be open to looking after him, but equally, if it's not right for the footy club, this just won't happen.
But at that time when he came out and said that he would like to stay, so the club was still very confident at that time that he would stay, and it changed since then?
Well, not necessarily any more confident than we were when we were saying that we believe that Dan enjoys being at the Port Adelaide Footy Club. It's just that Port Adelaide is not where his family is from ultimately. He's a Victorian. We have to deal with this every year where players may be thinking about going. Ultimately, it's only at the end of season where they make those decisions as to whether they want to go or not. Dan has said that that's his preference. Equally, he said that he's happy to stay if it can't work, and maybe with some of those other decisions that have happened or may happen over the next period of time, it might be harder for him to go.
How far are we away from a player and a club actually coming out mid-season and saying, I'm going to leave at the end of the season, but I'm going to give my 100% all for that club until the end?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be something that is a potential into the future. I guess you'd all probably have to have a look in the mirror and see how much carry-on actually goes on to see whether it would be worth a player and a club actually doing that. I think that's probably far more a question to the media than it is to the clubs. And we have to deal with players potentially wanting to go home all the time. So, you get to a period in the season where you start to think about it, but we're dealing with it, whether it be in season or sometimes pre-season, where we think that players may want to go into the future. So it's not that big of a deal for us. I mean, we, as I say, when 60% of our list is from Interstate, we're dealing with this all the time.
If Isaac and Harry go elsewhere, does that increase your desire to keep Dan or even further up his asking price?
What was that, sorry?
If Isaac and Harry don't come here, does that complicate things further with Dan?
Oh, well, look, part of the reason why we were interested in Isaac specifically was the potential for Dan to be going. Yeah, it probably does. I mean, that's the reality of these situations. You know, we've got a player here who's a two-time All-Australian half-back. If we don't have a dearth of those people, albeit we do have players that can play in that role, but it might make it a little bit harder. It doesn't mean that we're not willing to explore it on the basis that Dan would like it, but as I've said, it has to be right for all parties and specifically for the club.
Where do you see applications? Can you confirm that he's shows support or wants to come here?
Yeah, I mean, Jack has said to us that he wants to get to Port Adelaide in the trade period, and our challenge now is to work with the Gold Coast in order to make that potentially happen. I mean, we haven't engaged overly much with the Gold Coast as to what they might want, but there's still a week and a half to go before the trade period, and we'll get a better sense of that over that point in time. But we are ultimately pleased that Jack wants to land here. He's a good player who we've obviously been tracking for a decent period of time, and if we can get him to our club, I'm sure that we'll look at our list and feel like we'll be better again in 2025.
We've seen with Asava this season, obviously recruited as a key back, and then his versatility paid off towards the end of the year. Where do you see for Jack? Do you see him as a forward, or is it more a situation where he could swing back and forwards?
No, I think Jack's a forward. So for him to come into our club, I think that's what we're thinking. But there's a fair bit of water still to go under the bridge to make that deal happen.
You need to get into the first round of this year's draft. Is that good a quality of players that you need to get one of them?
Yeah, I mean, we would always like to be, in the first round of the draft. Whether that can happen or not, I guess, is another thing. We've typically been happy to explore, all parts of the process of getting new players onto our list. The draft this year we think has some depth. So whether it's getting up the top end of the first round or not, we would like to be able to replenish our list this year with some draft picks. Yes.
Will the Soldo deal probably with St Kilda be fairly straightforward?
I'm not sure it'll be straightforward. I mean, obviously, again, Ivan understands that the deal has to be right for the club if he was to go out. He's certainly suggested to us that he would like to get back to Victoria, but whether that can happen or not and what the deal's worth, I don't want to overcommit to something right now that when there's just so much of a trade period to play out, and ultimately, even though you might see deals, the Soldo deal may be us and just one other club, they're all so linked that it would be premature for me to talk about what we're looking for there.
If it was to be a future first rounder using the Lukosius deal, do you need to get a special exemption from the AFL because you've traded those away in the past? Is that what am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I mean that's something that the AFL have discretion over. So if we end up down that path, and I'm not specifically saying that in regard to the Lukosius situation, but if we were to do that for any player through this period, then that would be something that we would need to get off of the AFL. I don't see that that's necessarily going to be an issue, but it's a discretionary option that the AFL have.
Is that more appealing, that option? Again, I know we're talking hypotheticals, but trading that away, both for Gold Coast because they need the future picks next year, and also it means that you're not trading away in a valuable draft this year?
Well, I don't know what Gold Coast's motivation would be. I don't particularly want to speak for them. I don't think it would be right for me to do, but we will work with the Gold Coast to try and find the right deal for Jack.
It's a first of some description around the mark, do you think, for Jack, the first round pick?
Well, again, there are just so many things that go into these considerations that I just don't think it would be wise of me right now to be nailing, colours to the lamppost as to what anyone's worth. There's capacity now, and again, I'm not talking specifically around Jack. This is there are so many more mechanisms within trades now that, whether it be the money aspect, whether it be, you saw Jack Bowes go to Geelong a few years ago. From that perspective, the AFL are far more open now to effectively clubs buying picks. So there are just so many different things that go into that. You're not going to get me to talk about the specifics of what we want for any player who's going out, or what we think right now is fair for any value that might be coming in.
Can you give an indication of that length of deal for Jack? 6-7 years?
I'm not going to. If we're able to get the deal done, we'll talk about that then.
Is Ken certain to coach a club next year?
Right now there's so much time has gone into everyone asking Ken that question that I can only reiterate the position that I'm seeing through the exit period, and that is that Ken is absolutely committed to this group getting better for 2025. So I guess that would be ultimately a question for Ken, but from my standpoint, I'm not seeing anything here that would suggest that he's not as equally enthused on the potential for next year than what he was this time last year.
There was a suggestion the other night that he's potentially weighing up his future, or looking into next year, so that's not the case from your end.
Well, I haven't seen. I equally haven't seen what you're talking about there. So all I can say is we've come from 3 days worth of exit meetings. We've come from the start of what our coaching review looks like, and there is nothing right now that's suggesting to me that Ken doesn't have the energy for the 2025 season.
You can only speak on this really so much, but how is, I guess, Ken tracking personally? A huge season for him with a lot of external noise. It must take a toll.
Yeah, I think it takes a toll on every coach, and again, I don't need to talk solely about Ken here, but the 18 AFL senior coaches have a tough job. They bear the brunt of people feeling like they're on top of the world if they're up the top of the ladder, or equally that they're the problem when their team is down the bottom, whether that be Ken or the other coaches around the competition. I think Ken is a remarkably resilient person who has shown over time that he is able to get a fair bit out of this group. You don't perform the way that we do without having a coach who can drive and motivate both his playing group and also the staff around him.
Given the circus that we saw at the end of last year around Ken's contract, is that something the club's going to have to consider heading into next year in terms of the way you announce what the future may look like for him?
I don't really understand, what the premise of that conversation. I can't say it anymore, Josh, as to what my view is. We obviously would like him to feel the support of our entire club, but equally, we also know that everyone is entitled to an opinion as well on that. So, Ken's been around long enough to know that the ultimate part of what he can deliver for the club is our win-loss record. And of course, we've spoken enough about the fact that we haven't got to a grand final through this period, where we have had pretty good levels of performance, through the minor round and in some finals. We're not going to be able to stop that probably until this time next year again, but Ken does a good job, and I think any suggestion that he's not doing a good job or that our squad hasn't achieved something this year is entirely wrong.
So you're confident he's still the right man for the job going into next year?
Yeah, well, I've never said anything other than that, Matt. But at the end of the day, that this is something that the club and Ken have been really cognizant over time, and it's not just with Ken's role; it's with a number of other roles within the club as well. We've got to plot ourselves a path into the future that has our team performing better than what we already have, and that's coming from a really high base. So, I think I don't need to sit here and defend Ken, but I think sometimes the noise is easier to take for people who actually don't achieve in the minor round or in some finals. At the end of the day, we got to a preliminary final the other day. We didn't get to the grand final and we didn't win. So we acknowledge that, but no one here or no one outside of our club is going to stop us from feeling like we achieved something this year. And I encourage you to all think about that when you're reporting into the future. Is surely we're good enough to think that Port Adelaide achieved something this year, albeit we didn't achieve what our ultimate goal was in comparison to maybe some other clubs.
I guess
Josh, you clicked over 16, mate, got 4 minutes.
Okay, I guess you say there's no way to stop that speculation. I suppose if the club came out and announced like an official handover or something along those sorts at the start of next year, that would do that. Is anything like that?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that that's the case. So I don't agree with what you're saying there, but equally, I'm not going to say that here. When the time comes that Ken wants to give the game away, then I think we've got some very good candidates internally to take over that position, and I've said that ad nauseum. But I'm not going to say that right now.
Are you here next year, Chris?
Well, I think from my own perspective, this is an important time for us all to recalibrate where the next part of our club actually goes. Now, from my perspective, I never want to be in the situation where I'm sitting here guaranteeing my own future into the future. The club has its own right, and I've said this so many times that at the end of each season, I never want to be in a situation where I'm guaranteeing the future to myself. The Port Adelaide Football Club is an institution. It's been a place that I have admired, even though I supported a different club growing up. I've admired from the minute that I could think about a future in football. And if Port Adelaide didn't think that I was the right person into the future to take, from a footy management perspective, to take it forward, then I'll be the first one to put my hand up and say, okay, I'll look for what's next.
I'm more talking about Collingwood's perceived interest in you going there.
Yeah, and look, what I've never done is comment specifically on who might be interested in me, whether they are or not. So I'm certainly not giving you a direct answer with regard to any other club. But first and foremostly, I don't want to be sat here and saying that I'm the man for the next 5 years at Port Adelaide if Port Adelaide didn't think that was the case.
Speaking of Collingwood, because obviously a lot of players get thrown up, but you're interested in Joe Richards, and then Ollie Ward's been thrown in. So can you just speak to those and where you sit particularly with the Ollie Ward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's reasonable to say we have interest in Joe Richards. He's a player that fits probably what a need for us, that we'd like to add some depth in that front half. The small forward type crew is something that we would like to add something to. We've got a couple of young guys who are progressing, but equally, when we missed Sam Powell-Pepper this year, we felt like we lost a little bit there. So Joe's a player that we have some interest in. There was nothing in Ollie Lord's exit interview which would suggest that he's looking at playing his footy elsewhere next year. So I think that was what you asked. Yep. So I would suggest that right now that Ollie is at our club moving forward.
Are you expecting Boak to play on?
Well, I think what we have both done, the club and Trav, is to kick that issue down the track. We're not looking for Travis to make a decision in the next period of time, and equally for Trav, we made sure that he was aware that we needed to look at what else was coming in from our list perspective. So I think Travis should get a massive tick for the fact that he played better footy this year than what he did last year. And so on that basis, we'll work with Travis over the next week or two to have a look at what 2025 looks like, whether that be on field or what his options are away from the game.
Last couple of guys.
Yeah, a bit of a left field.
I'm happy to stay. I told you, this is the last time these people get me. So that's right. Yeah.
Bit of a left field one I've been asked to ask. Was it Paul Rosonico who started the argy-bargy after your round 10 win over Hawthorn?
Who's asked you to say that? Let's come on. You either take responsibility for that question, or you out whoever it is that has asked you.
It's just internal questions.
Oh, of course.
There
of
was
course.
Kane, I think, brought it up on Footy Classified the other night that it might have been a mistaken identity that caused this argy-bargy, which supposedly was the origin of the Ken situation.
Right, look, the two people that I really enjoy there, one is Riz, who, is I think he's a 9-time All-Australian interchange steward. He has done a fantastic job for us over time. I can't really remember, but what I do know is I watched that segment from Kane the other night and I could not stop laughing. So I did text Kane not long after and say that was some of his best work. I know he played 300 games here at Port Adelaide, but maybe that topped some of it. I thought it was a very funny, only maybe topped by his earlier stuff earlier in the year, which I found hilarious as well. But look, maybe Riz is fake Ken. I'm not. I don't really know.
Is the club seething about the fine, 20 grand?
Oh, look, we've seemed to have some of those situations this year where we've put ourselves at the front of whatever the AFL's new queue of fines might be. So if that's 20 grand into the future, then I guess we're all going to have to sit and cop it. I don't particularly need to say anything other than, I think Ken would want his time back if he could, but equally, as I say, if that's 20 grand in the future, then so be it.
Do you feel like there will be ongoing animosity with Hawthorn over it?
Well, it seems like if anyone can't deal with it at the moment, it's not us. So, whether there's... Look, I can't imagine that the next time the Hawthorn players are out there that they're worried about Ken's situation. But who knows?
Sam Mitchell's made a few public comments now. Will the club seek to repair that relationship?
I never had a relationship with Sam, so I'm not sure if Ken did. It doesn't really fuss me. I mean, I'm not out there on the games. It's more about, as you know, it's always about the players.
Will Ken take an extended break at all, or back in pre-season as normal?
Right now, he's back to pre-season as normal. He'll get enough off. He's not the type of person who needs massive amounts of time to recharge normally, so I don't expect Ken to not be here for the first part of pre-season. I mean, there's a number of our people who have got trips overseas, different professional development type work, but right now, I expect Ken back late November.
Is there a feeling as well, kind of on the Lord question as well, about him staying on next year? If you can get his body right, obviously he has that issue right before the start of the year and only plays the handful of games. You have him, you have George, you bring Lukosius in. It's a completely different forward line. Does it feel like missing piece is too strong, but it's a completely different look that then sets up?
Yeah, I think if you look at last year, even with Jeremy not hitting the heights that he did last year, missing Pep, Todd obviously in and out this year. I think we got 100 goals from those players last year. I think it was about 30 this year. We've got some players who can help us. Ollie Lord through the pre-season would have no doubt played round one now, and Jeremy would have missed. And so it's a long time ago now, but I do remember in pre-season Lord going pretty well. So the fact that he got an injury quite close to the season didn't help him, and certainly derailed a fair bit of his season, unfortunately for him. But look, he's played good AFL footy. He's good enough. We've got Jeremy there. I do think we're going to have to look at the way that we structure up, and the reality is with Charlie gone, and I shouldn't stop here without mentioning Charlie, who's been an absolute warhorse for us over time. For him to put his hand up and pull the pin, we're totally supportive of that decision and acknowledging the role that Charlie has played in our club over time, as well as Trent McKenzie, who both of those players came in and performed outstanding roles for us.
The one I didn't mention there was obviously Todd. I know he's got no symptoms, and the next interview, get a play on next year. But how do you manage him in terms of his concussions? Is there a little bit of for an example, the Will Bukowski factor in terms of confidence as well? It's not just necessarily about the concussions, it's also having the confidence in his body that he's going to be okay to go out there and take hits?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. When you have the situations that he has been in, I'm sure you would all understand that there can be some anxiety that is attached to that, and I don't think that that's unreasonable at all. Again, Todd has left this period of time absolutely committed to continuing to play. His symptoms are getting better very quickly, and on that basis, I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be attacking 2025 with the same gusto that he has in previous years, and that's exactly his feel as well. Now, there obviously is extra care on Todd through that, but that's only because he's been in that situation before. That's not because he's experiencing ongoing symptoms. And I don't know Will Bukowski, and I don't know the other players who have had to retire, but what I do think is that there's been some ongoing symptoms that maybe they haven't been recovering from in the same time periods as what Todd has. Now, that's not to say that we're not mindful of Todd into the future, but right now we're fully expecting Todd to continue to play for a long period of time.
What involvement, if any, will the AFL have on this one with Todd, given the frequency?
Well, I don't think that they have any other specific responsibility than to just continue to make sure that they're getting feedback from our doctors as to how Todd is going. I mean, any player in the concussion protocols, we have to provide some of the reporting back to the AFL. But when they're back out there as if they're any other player in the 22. Now, we, as I think those who have been camped out the front of some of the doctors, Todd has gone to different experts to try and make sure that we have a baseline here of testing that we can refer back to into the future. But Todd's really committed and a little bit disappointed in this season, but equally feeling like he has the potential to become a really good player for us.
Your club has said many times it's never worked harder on its goal kicking and finished 18th for conversion in the competition. What revisions do you think need to be made in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that type of what you have to do, Josh, is you have to look at conversion in live play in comparison to what's happening from a set piece type situation, and they're two totally different things. We play a game style which is high pressure in our forward line, which makes a hell of a difference. If you think about the way that we were trying to go about it against Sydney in comparison to the way that they were able to move the ball into a less dense forward line, that's going to have that sort of effect. So I'd hope that you actually look into it a little bit deeper than just a headline number. But there's no doubt we'll continue to look at ways that we can be better at that in the future. Some of that will be helped by personnel.
Tom Cleary obviously hasn't been able to break his way in the senior side. Some interest from the Eagles. He's sort of willing to let him go if there is an opportunity for him to play senior football.
Yeah, I think in fairness to Klaus, who's been a fantastic servant of ours, we would be open to Tom finding a new home. Again, not to suggest that he's not valued here, and if it doesn't work, then he'll provide a great experience to an SNFL team, which really struggled this year. So we're mindful of gutting our depth to a point where that SNFL team is any worse than what it was, because in fairness it was pretty horrid at some points this year. But that's something that we're mindful of. But as I say, in fairness to Tom, who's given us great service, if he was able to find a home, then we'd be open to that.
I just want to circle back to the Lord very quickly. As far as you're concerned, he's on a do not trade list. Like you wouldn't consider.
Well, as I say, this idea that players are off limits and all that sort of stuff, I've never been the type of person who said that. But there's nothing to suggest right now that Ollie wants to leave our club, and there's nothing from our perspective which would suggest that we want him to go. His opportunities are well and truly going to be here, where Charlie's not going to be here. We've got a forward line that we need to rethink the way that we do things into next year.
Just on that, will Asawa go back to training with the defence over summer, you suspect?
We'll work on that. I mean, when the pre-season starts, you'll get more of an indication. I'm not totally sold either way right now. Again, we might think about what happens during the trade period to make that final decision on our squad as a whole, not just Asava. But Asava went forward because we had a need this year. It doesn't necessarily think that we think that that's his best position, but we'll have to wait and see.
You touch on the SANFL side. How crucial is it that reserves comes in, and can anything really be done in terms of improving the SANFL side before that happens?
Well, look, our position is not going to change in the sense that the club's view is the AFL will have a responsibility to, make sure that every team has the same opportunity in the second tier. So that being said, I think the SANFL and the AFL are still working towards making some changes with regard to the top-up player rules at that level. And at the very least, that needs to happen in the short term. As I say, it's not going to stop us from still having a view that the AFL have a responsibility to all of us to make sure that that's something that they deal with. But the SANFL and the AFL need to come together to fix some of those rules into next year. And I think that will help to make us better. It won't address everything. So we'll have to wait and see.
Your reshuffle with Dr. Fisher has been a great servant. Can you just talk us through that?
Yeah, so Fish had always suggested to me that 2024 may be his last year as the Chief Medical Officer. We've been fortunate that Fish has given us a decent sort of lead-in to think about who was going to replace him. We had committed to Jager Wiley a couple of years ago to say, mate, here's a potential opportunity for you. He's done everything that I could have asked, and so we'll give him the opportunity to be our Chief Medical Officer next year. Fish will go back into that second doctor role with maybe someone else that we might consider bringing in and help to be a mentor to Jager into the future.
Luke Kelly also announced today as a departure. How much more assistant coach reshuffle are you expecting?
I don't think we'll lose any more assistant coaches. We'll just have to sit down through this review period and work out who we actually want to bring in from there.
Timmy Parham coming over?
Yeah, so Tim's a person that is well known to us, has worked here at Port Adelaide before, and we're pleased that I haven't actually announced that to the players yet, but you heard it first. He'll be coming back to the club next year.
Logan Evans made a seamless transition into the AFL this year. Are we expecting a long-term deal for him?
Well, Logan was already, I think he was on an 18-month contract from that mid-season point. So, look, we'll work through that. But it's fair to say that Logan, when I reflect upon some of what we achieved this year, we saw some improvement from a whole heap of young players. I'm sure you would reflect upon. Horn Francis looks like he's going to be an absolute star. Zach took another step forward. Logan Evans, what a story. Came into our team in the back half of the year. May be part of the reason why when we went from 3 tools to 2, for him to play the footy that he did, he just looks like he's going to be a 10-year player right now. Now, Logan's got some confidence, so he might not use this tonight because we might have to bash it out of him again. But he's the type of player that you look at and go, he's going to be a proper AFL player.